share this. Okay, so welcome to our webinar. And then what we have today is just the power of podcasting and let's amplify your message. So we just want to make sure you're muted to limit any noise background. Please feel free to ask questions. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, feel free to click on the participants button, raise your hand, put it in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as well. And then our presenters will be sharing their videos, but we'll stop sharing for discussion as well. So we thank our sponsors who give us some funding to help with our webinar. So we want to thank Shoreline and Overdrive. So these are our sponsors, CPEN, and sponsoring our webinar. So we thank them. We have our International Cancer Education Conference coming up. This is a partnership we do with the AACE and the EACE. For the International Cancer Education Conference. It'll be in Lexington, Kentucky, towards the end of September. Here are the dates, the 24th to the 27th. I've been to ICEC the past 2 years. Wonderful event, have made wonderful connections with folks. So we really ask people to think about joining CPEN, thinking about coming to ICEC, and really sharing your work as well. So today we have two people that will be presenting about the power of podcasting and let's amplify your message. So we have Peggy Picard here, who is the executive director of the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link. And she's going to talk about the podcast that she helps put out there to the public. And then we also have John Gay, who is the founder of JAG in Detroit podcast, a podcast producer, and has really partnered with Peggy to get this podcast out there to folks. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I think John is going to go ahead and share his.
All right, let's see here.
And John, I'll let you know how it looks.
Does that look right to you, Bo?
You still have the preview of the next slide.
Okay, how about now?
Still there.
All right.
Right now.
I always get that part backwards.
I know,
apologies.
It happens, same.
Let's see here. Let me try sharing a different tab.
And then just put this in slideshow mode.
Is it still backwards?
Yeah, it's still backwards.
There we go. All right.
It is.
Just the right combination.
Yeah,
I'm an audio guy, not a visual guy. That's my problem.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Well, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you, Bo, for the lovely introduction. We're thrilled, Peggy and I, to talk to you today. We'll give you a quick little bit about each of our backgrounds, and then we'll get right into it. I am a former radio DJ, did that for 15 years before I founded my company, Jag in Detroit Podcast, in 2018, specializing in helping businesses and nonprofits create broadcast quality podcasts to connect with their audience. And Peg, to be transparent, was one of my first clients, and she's not only a client, she's become a friend. We've developed a great relationship over the last several years. I've really enjoyed working with her. Peg, if you want to give a quick background on yourself.
Sure can. So John, we say that John is now part of our staff. He understands all things transplant, graft versus host disease. He's even correcting me sometimes at this point. So that's how well we work together. I'm the executive director for 8 years now, and my background is public relations. So it's interesting how exciting this is for me to tell the stories of the patients, and we'll talk about that more later. But I think the public relations background really prompted me to want to do these podcasts, and we're just thrilled to share with you really how easy and fun it is. It's not intimidating. I'm going to keep telling you that. And if you ever have any questions, John and I would always be happy to help you, because it is a wonderful way to share stories.
I think Peggy is right. The hardest part about doing a podcast is actually doing it. Starting it is the hardest part. Once you get over that hurdle, the rest of it comes a lot easier. So our Marrow Masters podcast, at the end of 2023, we published our 12th season. We're up near 100 episodes at this point. We've talked to caregivers. We've talked to doctors, nurses, patients, survivors, etc. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. I think somebody may be not muted that needs to mute themselves. That said, I'm going to play you a scaled down version of our trailer, which is kind of the teaser we put out before each season. This is a 90-second version of what we covered in our most recent season, season 12. And it's as you can see on the screen, I'm home. Now what? Here's the 90-second teaser for that. Welcome to season 12 of the Marrow Masters podcast, brought to you by the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link. This season focuses on one critical question. I'm home. Now what?
Physically, it's like just getting myself down the stairs into the kitchen so that I can eat breakfast. It's like, how am I going to get to the refrigerator?
When you're in getting the transplant, you're in a very protected environment. And then coming home, the adjustment to not being able to have people over, your everyday habits, you have to rethink them.
There were a lot of things that were really exciting about being home. There were some things that were scary, like being so far from the hospital.
To have this happen to me was the punch in the gut that was unexpected. Cancer defined me for the moment that I'm in it, but it doesn't define my future.
After a transplant, we need to be a little bit more vigilant.
It is very, very important for you to talk with your medical provider about any mood or sleep changes that you're experiencing, because those things are treatable. You don't need to suffer.
Season 12 of the Marrow Masters podcast, sponsored by Sanofi, is out December 19th. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to our show for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or on our website, nbmtlink.org. So you may have heard in there Sanofi referenced as a sponsor. That is how Peg funds the cost of putting together the podcast. Is she asks specifically for partners to create, grant proposals. She can talk more about that if we want to get into that later. But you hear the voices, the 6 people on the screen right now. They're all walks, social workers, caregivers, patients, survivors, and really the whole point of this podcast is to tell their stories and their voices and connect with folks. Peg has connected us with so many wonderful people. And I'm not going to read you the slides because Peg and I agree we don't like when people read their own slides. But you can see 2 testimonials here of patients that have really gotten a lot out of our podcast and how it really has helped them connect with the community and help find, whether it's tips and tricks for battling GVHD or just that feeling of knowing that they're not alone. And I know so many of you on this call have dealt with that with your patients and the people that you serve. It's that sense of community and just, you're not alone in this. Peg, is there anything you want to add here?
Yeah, after listening to the trailer again, John, when the season comes together and we pick out the sound bites we want to use, it's always quite emotional for me because all that hard work of interviewing those people and just getting the best of the best quotes it's really special when the trailer is complete. And to get this kind of feedback from our constituents that this is what these podcasts mean to them, it's so rewarding.
So we've kind of given you the end product. Let's back up to the beginning a little bit. So quick introduction for those of you who aren't familiar with podcasting. All it is storytelling. Back to the caveman days, sitting around a fire. That's how we started communicating as long as history goes. This is just the modern way to do that. The unofficial tagline of my company is, nobody knows your organization's story better than you, and a podcast can help you tell it. That just goes to everything that Peg has been saying. I'm not going to bombard you with numbers. I'm only going to give you a few today, but just to show you how big podcasting has become, basically 2/3 of the U.S. population age 12 and up have listened to a podcast. You can see how much of that is the last month, the last week. And among avid podcast listeners, they listen to 9 episodes per week. So you're trying to crack that top 9. When it was 8, we said it was like MySpace cracking the top 8. And then you can see here, just in the last 9 years, how much podcasting has grown in terms of people spending time with spoken word audio. That's AM, FM radio, podcasts, and audiobooks and things like that. You can see here how quickly podcasts have gained on radio. And I say this as a former radio person. In 2024 or maybe 5, podcasting is going to overtake talk radio. That's how big podcasting has become. It's such a great way to get your message out. Peg's going to talk a little bit now about the timeline of how this whole project came together.
So John and I have a mutual friend that I was having breakfast with, and I told him I wanted to think about podcasting, and he said, you absolutely need to call John Gay. So I did, and that was in early 2019, and the rest is history. I will say that We do 2 to 3 seasons a year. We're getting ready in 2024 to do seasons 13, 14, and 15. So this is kind of the timeline. And just a fun fact, I looked right before we started this presentation, and we are at 26,153 downloads as I speak, with 4 people today and 46 on Sunday. So what I love about this is while we're doing other things, people are benefiting from our podcast and listening it and getting something out of it. So that's just super exciting for us.
And that's the power of sharing it. And I'll get to how people find podcasts and share them in a moment. But even if we're not actively promoting something today, people are finding it, or they downloaded it before and they're coming back and listening now. So that's a great point, Peg. You know, I had a early mentor in radio, and this applies to podcasting too, who said doing a radio show, excuse me, is like driving a NASCAR. I've never watched a NASCAR race in my life, but the concept is pretty simple. All your work in the pit, so when the light turns green, all you've got to do is drive. And that means who, what, when, where, why. Who you're going to have on the show, what's it about, when is it going to come out? And importantly, consistency is more important than quantity. So if you only have the bandwidth to do it once a month, that's fine. Just accept that expectation with your listeners that it's going to be once a month. Where you're going to record it, Peg and I do it virtually. She actually sends microphones to guests. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. And why are you doing it? Are you showcasing your organization? Are you trying to bring in more donors? And Peg, I love this last line. Peg added this last bullet point about telling stories to help others cope and thrive. So we'll give you before, during, and after the recording. So Peg, do you want me to take this one, or are you going to take this one?
No, I'll take this one. So what I do is I survey our constituents. I find out what unmet need can I focus on for this season. And then I develop a theme. Sometimes it's just a conversation with someone, a patient or a caregiver, and they ask me something and I think, oh, that would make a great season. So it's just that simple. Then we make sure that we have a diverse list of podcasters. Of course, I have to find them, make sure they're comfortable, because some people just really aren't. Although most of the people I've asked are very comfortable with this, which is really great. And then we send them our microphone in the mail. We confirm a date that will work. We use a great calendar system that John has, where I don't even have to bother him. I can go into his calendar, book a session. We book up to an hour. We talk usually, I hate to put a time on it, but I'd say 25 to 45 is usually our average. And then John will work his magic, but we'll get to that later. How I come out about the content is usually to ask my guest, what 10 to 15 bullets, what are the most important things on your mind regarding this subject that you think you would want to cover? And that begins the beginning of a draft script that is very casual. I type it out, what they say, what I say, but knowing it's going to be a very loose script that we're sort of going to follow. And we'll get to more of that later.
Absolutely. And, reaching out to them is so important, and figuring out who is comfortable talking. During the recording, this is where we kind of set it up where we put them at ease. That's the most important thing. Peggy, you want to pick up from there?
So what I do is I just tell them we're going to have a chat. It's going to be recorded and edited, and we're going to sound so wonderful. There's going to be no ums and likes. John makes us sound terrific. And this is something I learned kind of along the way. I asked them to remember how they felt when they were at the beginning of their journey and what they wish they knew. And I think that might be one of the most important things about this, what they want to share to make it easier for the next person going through what they went through. And when you ask them that, it opens a floodgate, because people really do want to help. And then this I love, many times the absolute best content is what we come up with when we're almost done recording. It's all of a sudden I'll say it, or the person I'm interviewing will say, you know what, there is something else I want to talk about. I want to have people over, but my house is not always organized enough. But I don't want to say no to my friends, because then they're not going to ask anymore. And then I think in the middle of that chat with Barb, I said, Barb, would it be better if you went outside and sat on the patio, or your friend invited you to breakfast? She goes, it really would. And so some of the best content is really when we're just chit-chatting away about their situation.
Something I learned really early on in this process is after, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for having me. not to hit stop on my recorder, because sometimes that banter afterwards, sometimes you get just this nugget that's just so worth holding on to when somebody, lets their guard down a little bit more. And to Peg's point on there in the beginning, we always tell all of our guests that the beauty of podcasting, nothing is live, everything is recorded. For us, we do audio only, so they don't have to worry about looking in a certain place or looking at a camera. And I go ahead and I take what we call disfluencies, like, kind of, sort of, all those crutch words that we all use. I was a radio teacher for 15 years and I still use those words. I pull them out of the final recording. And I tell them, if you start to say a sentence incorrectly, just, you don't like the way it's coming out, say it again. And Peg, I don't know if she does this intentionally, but sometimes Peg, at the beginning of the podcast, she will trip over the first sentence in the intro and she'll do it 2 or 3 times. And so then that puts the guest at ease. Oh yeah, Peg just messed up. No problem. I can mess it up myself and it will be fixed in post-production. And then Peg, after the recording?
So yeah, there's definitely some paperwork that we have to contend with, and I call it the permission slip. Everybody always likes that. We got to get their permission slip and obtain a photo so that we can make our pretty flyer. We have to have their permission to use their voice promotionally, as well as on the actual podcast. Then we ask if there's any links. If it's someone that works at a hospital, this is their chance to shine and share the links from their center, because the show notes are really important. We've had several authors on our show where they want to share the link to order their book on Amazon or whatever. And then at the end, I really think this is important. We allow them the chance to review their episode. We hardly ever, gosh, I think we can count on one hand the times we've ever had an edit, because John does such a great job. But just to know that they are happy with it before it hits, Spotify or Apple, etc.
We always make the joke, this is not the New York Times. We're not hard-hitting journalists playing gotcha journalism here. We want the guests to be comfortable with what the material they're putting out there, especially given the nature of what everybody on this call does. I'm not going to go too long into equipment. There's a QR code on the screen. I have an entire page on my website explaining the best kinds of equipment to get, which is a sticking point for a lot of folks. I will just say very quickly, if you're getting a microphone, you may have heard of the Blue Yeti microphone. It's the best marketed, worst performing microphone out there. If you have a Blue Yeti microphone, get rid of it, get something else. You can get a microphone for about 60 or 70 bucks cheaper, called the Samsung Q2U or an Audio Technica. They're on Amazon. They plug right into the USB on your computer. Done and done. And there's plenty more explanation on my website there. And then also the last line on there, and we just talked about it, the importance of editing. If you are doing a podcast, if you either edit it yourself or hire somebody to edit it for you. I just went through a podcast that I think I shaved 10 minutes off of just by pulling out the ums and uhs and likes and you-knows. It was a 55-minute podcast. It was 45 when I was done with it. In addition to making your guest sound smarter and yourself, you're also keeping in mind everybody has such limited time these days. Why not give a listener that 10 minutes out of their day back and pull out all those ums and uhs and likes and you-knows and stuff like that? A little bit about how podcasting works. For those who aren't familiar, your podcast, like your website, has to physically be hosted and live somewhere. You may have heard of Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Blueberry, Simplecast. Those are podcast hosts. That is the hub, and the directories are your spokes. So your host will give you that fancy schmancy URL with all the letters and gobbledygook in it. Once your podcast host does that, you simply give that code to Apple, Spotify, and the others, and that will connect the apps to your host. The apps are free to be on. The host will generally run you around $15 per month. Once it's connected once, all you've got to do when you have a new episode done, you upload it to your host, and Apple, Spotify, and the others will pull, and YouTube now, will pull it in from your host, and it's very easily done. Everything is done in one central location. So Peg gave the updated numbers. I pulled these a little bit earlier in the week. Your host will also give you really good analytics on who's listening to your show and how. So again, I pulled this, I think, on Monday. We were at 26,142 downloads. It tells you how many in the last week, the week before. On the left, you'll see which of our episodes did the best. Must knows about life-saving clinical trials. That's something that our audience is dying to know. I apologize for that phrasing. That was not intentional. But those are the title of your podcast is really going to go a long way in terms of your Google SEO, things like that. That was obviously a very big one. Basics of chronic versus graft versus host disease, also a huge topic for us and in our audience with what Peg does at the NBMT link. So those types of titles were attention grabbing and had valuable information in them, and on down the list. And you can also see Apple Podcasts is the most dominant platform for our listeners. Simplecast means they're listening on the web, either on Peggy's website or on just their Facebook browser, wherever they saw the link to the podcast, and Spotify as well. YouTube, for reasons I won't get into here, is counted separately, but Apple, Spotify, and YouTube are the places your podcast absolutely needs to be. There are a bunch of other apps, but as you can see on here, they make up 1 to 2% of all podcast listening. If you're going to start a podcast, absolutely be on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And also Google Podcasts is going away in April. We'll get to that as well. YouTube specifically, it is crucial for your podcast strategy. As many of you know, Google owns YouTube, so having a YouTube presence is great for your podcast Google SEO. How many times have you Googled how to do something and you get 6 YouTube videos in your search results? Same concept applies. Folks are consuming podcasts on YouTube. And again, the reason here, Google can search text. Peg mentioned show notes earlier. If you've ever listened to a podcast on your phone, you scroll down, you see all the notes, and you can also put a transcript in there as well. Google can search the text of your show notes and your transcript. So if somebody searches, bone marrow transplant or graft versus host disease in Google, Google is going to see those terms in our podcast, and it'll pop up in search results. So your notes, the text, are very important. It's also important to know that your audio-only podcast can be on YouTube. It doesn't have to be video to be on YouTube. I think that scares a lot of people away, where they say, oh, I don't feel comfortable being on camera. My patients and my constituents aren't going to feel comfortable being on camera. Well, you don't have to be on camera. The screenshot here is from YouTube, and this is Diane, one of our guests in the most recent season. That's what you see. You play it, the audio plays on YouTube, and it's just a still image of Diane. So there's no need to have the video to be on YouTube. And there are ways to get on YouTube, which I can get into offline for folks as well. But being on YouTube, even if audio only, is crucial. Once you've promoted your podcast, I've got good, better, best, and bestest ways to promote it. So short video clips on social media, you can even make that video clip out of a piece of audio, or you can do something as simple as holding your phone up and saying, hey, it's John and Peg. We just did a great episode. Go check it out. Obviously, YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels and TikTok are huge right now in terms of popularity. Having having a presence on those places is only going to help you. Better is to share the episode link. You can share it on Facebook, Twitter, aka X, LinkedIn, all those places. And if your guests are comfortable, have them promoted to their network. So it's not just going out to your network, it's going out to folks they know as well. They go, hey, I was on this great podcast, check it out. An email list is even better, because you're not relying on Mark Zuckerberg to show your link to somebody in their social feed, or Elon Musk or whoever. If you have an email list, you're guaranteed to land in somebody's inbox. You can just put a link to the podcast right in the email. And then word of mouth is huge. Getting your listeners to share with friends and family is really the key to getting podcasts out there. Peg's going to talk about some specific ways she's promoted our podcast, Marrow Masters.
Yeah, so of course, Nick, you've done all this hard work and you want people to listen. You want everyone to know about it. So we will do, Jen Gillette, our licensed staff social worker, also does our social media, and she will promote each episode, which is huge. We will encourage our podcasters to share it with their networks. And boy, if you're working with a doctor or a social worker at a hospital, try to get them to share it, because their reach is going to be incredible. And once somebody listens to one of them, I know that in my life, if I find a podcaster that I really enjoy, I want to listen to more of what they have produced. So making sure people are sharing your episodes is just so important. And as I said earlier, just watching the numbers grow, it is just so exciting to tune in and see where, how many people. Sometimes it's Tuesday afternoons are the most popular time. Another week it's Sunday.
Yeah.
And more than anything, just to have fun with this. It is just such an exciting way to reach people.
Last slide I'm going to put up, and Bo, I can take this down when you're ready. But this is our contact info. If you want to know more about Peggy's experience with the podcast or any podcast questions in general, I'm always happy to have a conversation with anybody that has questions on things we didn't cover today or that we won't cover here coming up in the Q&A. But here's our contact info. If you want to take a picture of your screen, if you want it for later. And Bo, just let me know when you want me to stop sharing, and we can kind of go full screen for any Q&A we have.
Thank you. Thanks for this so much. I appreciate it. Let me just look.
Nope.
I lost my my command thing. As always, I'm working on one screen because I'm in a different office, so I'm like so confused. Okay, let me see. All right, nothing in the chat. Does anyone have any questions or any comments, anything they would like to share from all the folks that are on?
Hi there, my name is Youngmi. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, Young.
Is there a reason why you choose, or what is the benefit of releasing an entire season, multiple episodes at once, as opposed to releasing them, say, once every couple of weeks or once a month or something like that?
Peg, do you have a thought on that?
John, I'm gonna let you, you steered me on this, so I think you should handle this one.
I think given the nature of what we're doing specifically with this podcast, and I think this would probably apply to many of you on the call as well, when you find a podcast episode that you really like, there's that binge capability. We kind of think of this podcast specifically as forgive the phrase, but binge worthy, where, oh, this was a great episode, I want to know more about this. So, and also just the cadence of how we've put it together, we're not on a set release schedule where we're doing one every week or one every month or things like that. And each of the 12 seasons has had a little bit of a different angle to it. For example, we just had the season 12 of I'm Home, Now What? And then there have been other seasons, dealing with chronic graft versus host disease or acute graft versus host disease, things like that. We felt that each season was better self-contained because it was about a specific topic, and you could kind of get that all at once. As opposed to on, off, on, off, on, off, as we were able to release them. But it's different for everybody. You may have a longer series where you are better off to do it at regular intervals. And sometimes there are, and sometimes that makes sense for the individual. That's something we figure out. When I sign a new client to do work on a podcast series, typically, so they don't feel like they're biting off more than they can chew, I'll say, let's do one season and it's X amount of episodes. That's actually how Peg and I started a few years ago. I said, let's do one season. It's a manageable amount of 6 or 7 or 8 episodes or whatever it was. And then at the end of the season, we say, okay, this was good. Let's do it again. I enjoyed doing this, that our patients got a lot out of this. Or, you know what, John, this really isn't for me. This isn't something I want to continue doing. So let's leave it at the one episode and be done.
And I might add too, it takes some pressure off knowing that we don't have to produce one a week, because we're really small at the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link. I cringe to think of the pressure I would feel if every week or every other week I had to know that was done. This way we line them up. Life happens for some of these patients where we're supposed to record and they have a doctor's appointment, or gosh, it could be something that happens with John and I.
Yeah.
And that way we have some flexibility. We just usually try about 3 months later, we try to release the season. Great question.
Hi, Cindy. I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to ask in terms of consent, because I'm kind of used to, from the research world, what we go through with IRB and getting approvals and having things vetted. So for your podcast consents, are there templates out there? How did you go about drawing up your consent?
I have a very simple permission slip, and I'd be happy to share it with you. I actually did run it by at the time. We have a pro bono law firm that helps us out occasionally. And I did at the time run it by them. It's very short and sweet. We've never had a problem. But happy to share it with you.
Great, thanks so much. Anybody have any other questions? I have a few that I jotted down while John and Peggy were talking, but does anyone have anything they want to add? Not seeing the hand raised. One question I guess I have for the group as a whole is, does anyone listen to podcasts now? any kind of podcast. I myself am a true crime podcast. I've listened to them all. So I want to know if you listen to podcasts. And the other question is, do you listen to any cancer ed or cancer theme, patient ed kind of theme podcast? If anyone would like to share. Someone has to listen to a podcast on here, right?
I'll volunteer. I do listen when I'm driving primarily. I can't do it when I'm working. I wish I could. But I'm interested in social media aspect of a patient ed because I think that's where people are really getting a lot of their content these days. And our group is thinking about expanding into this space. But where I've listened to sort of cancer talk or cancer podcast was a podcast called Scamanda, which is about a woman who faked having cancer for many,
heard of
many
this.
years.
Mm.
It was fascinating. And as a social worker, the red flags that I picked up on when they were telling her story were so interesting to me. But it was very difficult for the people around her as well. And so hearing their story, and there was a lot of conversation in the AYA space on Instagram in particular about this podcast. So it's interesting. I think the conversations that are being generated as a result of the content that is being put out there. Also agree, true crime.
Yeah.
Well, this is like true crime adjacent, Christina. That's
Right.
actually a really good point. And to your point, that is, all it takes is to go viral is the right people sharing it at the right time, and that can happen with. Fortunately, Peg and I have had some great success with that first episode, the episodes that I showed you in terms of popularity. Some people share it, and it's a small community, as most of you know, that are dealing with this sort of thing. But this community really is amped to share information wherever they can.
I think the most rewarding comment I ever got was a woman who said, I live in a rural area. I feel very alone in my GVHD. And sometimes I'll just make a cup of coffee and I'll listen to another one of your podcasts and I feel like I'm having coffee with a friend. And I think in my whole career, that was in my top 5 most rewarding moments. And it's why I just want to keep doing them. So
One of the
inspired you guys.
One of the things I often share with my background as a radio DJ is there's a certain intimacy to audio. If you think about the radio show that you grew up listening to, whether you were on the school bus or driving to work, whoever that is, whatever city you're in, you felt like you personally knew those morning show folks because there's a certain intimacy to they're on the radio, they're in the car or on the school bus with you. You feel like you know them personally. And that's kind of the beauty of a podcast is you really feel like you're connecting with, the host and the guests on the show.
Yeah, I could see a benefit of listening to patient experience for clinicians as well. So I think it's serving the patients, right? Like we're doing this for the patient to have a connection, but I really think it like pulls away like the curtain for the clinician to see like what people are really experiencing, what people are really thinking about. Because I think I know a lot of people here are in patient ed. My background, I've been a nurse for many years, over 20 years, and I came to the patient ed realm a couple of years ago, and I thought, I was the best educator for my patients when I was a nurse and didn't know a lot about the patient ed, the tenants, all these different things that we learn here. And then when you really think about it, learning like, I thought I was doing the best because from my lens, not from the patient lens. So sometimes when you hear these patient stories, it will change your approach of how you may teach them, how you may talk to them about certain things. It may lessen your fear of having conversations that you're worried about. I think a lot of clinicians, patient educators avoid topics such as death or sexual intimacy because people say, oh, I don't know if someone wants to talk about these things. And then you find out everyone wants to talk about these things because you listen to it and this is just another realm to get closer to your patients where you may not have that opportunity yet.
Peg will help me fill in the details here. I'm glad Bo referenced the sexuality piece of it, because I think Peg was probably thinking the same thing I was here.
Oh,
One of
yeah.
our most powerful moments we've had in the podcast was a clinician who specialized in helping folks deal with reproductive issues, whether it's egg freezing, sperm freezing, things like that, prior to going through chemo and cancer treatment. And what was the question the patient asked her,
So
Peg?
if you only listen to one of our podcasts, I recommend Dr. El Jaware. She was about season 4 or 5, if I had to guess. She's from she's from I think Massachusetts General. And the question, she admitted, she's a very high profile doctor too. And she said, Peggy, I had a patient after her transplant sit in my office and say, can I kiss my husband again now? And
After like 2 years, right?
Well, it was a post-transplant appointment, so
Okay.
probably within, a year or whatever. And she said, I failed her. She said, how did I not think to ever talk about that with my patients? She said, so for me, that was a big aha moment that I have to do better. And I just thought it was so humbling to hear this big doctor, say that on a podcast.
It's actually season 7, episode 1.
Thank you, John.
I
Thank
just went
you.
back and pulled it up. So the chat's disabled. Otherwise, I'd put it in the chat. But Marrow Masters is the name of the podcast. So
Yeah, pretty powerful.
Peg and I were both speechless at the time.
Tori, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Bo. John and Peggy, this is really, really wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. One question that's coming to mind is around the idea of wait times, and especially with the bone marrow transplant population, so much of their experience, from what I've heard, is just waiting, whether waiting for results or waiting to be with family members again. And I'm wondering if a podcast can sort of meet a need in these spaces of whether it's silence or you're sitting in infusion.
Oh, wow.
Have you seen, I guess my question is, do you see more folks utilizing podcasts as a form of how to manage the waiting that or I guess, I probably should have formulated this question better before asking it, but how do you see folks using this more frequently? Is it during wait times, or is it while they're at home? Do you have data on that?
Not specifically on that, Tori, but that's an excellent question, and you're just kind of jogging my brain right now that Peg and I should also promote this as something to listen to, as like you said, as you're sitting there in the room, or for treatment or things like that, as you're waiting. I think that's a fantastic idea as a angle for people to listen to this. But I think, Peg, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've just gotten just anecdotal feedback from listeners as far as they're home and they're trying to figure it out. What am I going to do? And especially because we've spent a lot of time on GVHD, as folks are home and they're battling, whether it's acute or in a lot of cases chronic GVHD. Oh, geez. Okay, well, this podcast talks about different balms and over-the-counter stuff to deal with GVHD of the skin, or eye drops for GVHD of the eyes. I think we've seen a lot post-transplant after they've come home, but I love that angle, Tori. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking we've got a new marketing angle to reach out to these centers and maybe provide some sort of postcard in the infusion centers. Thank you, Tori. Great idea.
All we've got to do is send them a QR code, and they can put it on the wall or on an easel or something. And if while you're sitting there going through treatment, just scan the QR code with your phone; it'll pop right up.
Oh, I love it. Great ideas.
Great. John, you mentioned, and I'm not sure if everyone knows the terminology, but you mentioned SEO,
Yes.
which was a foreign term for me before I started this role. So if you can talk a little bit about SEO and just what that is as a baseline knowledge for folks.
Well, I'm happy to give you a baseline, Bo, because I am not an expert in the topic.
Perfect.
But so SEO stands for search engine optimization. It's your ability to pop up when someone Googles something related to you. So there's paid search and there's natural search. We're not getting into the whole, paying for ads popping up on Google today. That's an entire other world. But, organic SEO is, if you are searching for a particular topic, I'll go back to graft versus host disease. If you go, or best tips for dealing with GVHD of the skin, or something along those lines. Google will search, especially if you're on YouTube, but it will anyway, but YouTube will only help because Google owns YouTube. It's that whole same ecosystem. If you have detailed show notes about in your podcast describing what is discussed in that podcast, Google can search through that and find those matching terms in your text. That's the bare bones thing you should do. Ideally, depending on your bandwidth, you should also have a transcript of the podcast for two reasons. One, that will also help your SEO because now you've got the entire conversation in text that Google can search for and match up to what somebody's typing into that search box on google.com. But also, and I think this will probably ring true in this group too, there's an accessibility piece of it. Folks may be hard of hearing. Folks may have an easier time reading a podcast than listening to a podcast. If they have any sort of physical limitations, I think of a podcast that I did for a group where one of the active members of the group was hard of hearing, and he said, "Thank you so much for putting these transcripts in. I can follow along so much easier." So the transcript is great for accessibility and inclusion, but also back to Bo's question, for the SEO piece of it, having all that detail in text, because Google can't search audio yet. Maybe they will in 5 years, but they can search text, and having everything that you want there is helpful, because the idea is, what do you want someone typing into that search box that your content is going to pop up? And in this case, it's podcast.
Great. Thanks for that explanation. One thing I was thinking about, and maybe I'll speak on behalf of many people on here, this does seem very intimidating.
Yes.
To think about starting a podcast, and like it seems something that could be very exciting for folks, but people are like wondering, how could I get there? How could we do this? How do we do that? So I think the resources you shared are great. The other thing I was thinking about is, this may be an opportunity I've just started getting emails for summer interns, like people that want to like help out in our space, or like, and a lot of younger people are very tech savvy. They're used to editing videos. They might have been doing this before. Maybe they can help initiate with that. So maybe that's one step you could do. Like, I have a friend that plays in GarageBand all the time and knows how to do all this stuff. That is so foreign to me. I don't know anything about that space, but I feel like we could maybe tap into some people that want to help to volunteer. We have a lot of like high school kids in our area that want to volunteer and help. How could they help? Maybe this is an avenue that you can go down.
That's a fantastic idea. Peg, do you want to speak a little bit about the whole intimidation piece of it when you started? Because it is pretty rough when you start it's scary, but until you actually get into it and see it's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as the development director and the executive director of my very small organization, the money, finding the funding first, and really only need a few $1,000s to get started. So, just being able to know that I had a little bit of funds to get the first season going, and really, to be perfectly honest, everyone, John is just a joy to work with. He guided me on every step of the way. So was I intimidated? Heck yeah. But knowing that we kind of were tackling it together, and this is a really important thing that happened with COVID too. We did our, well, I don't know if it was exactly COVID. We did our first season down at Carmanos, and we interviewed a few doctors and a nurse. And then, everything happened with COVID shortly thereafter, because our first season was 2019. Yeah, it was the timing of COVID.
We did a lot of interviews in person.
John was like, don't worry about it. We could do these remotely. And I thought, oh my gosh, I could do this from my home or my office. And he's like, absolutely. You just use a microphone and a headset and a microphone. And now I would never want to have to take the time to travel somewhere to do it. It's so convenient to just do this, from my home office. So, and I promise every one of you, if you are interested in giving it a try, I would be so happy to guide you. And I know John, John has an incredible business doing this. He would work with you. So please reach out if you're interested in giving it a try.
I see Jeff has their hand up.
Hey everyone, it's Jeff from Huntsman Cancer Institute. Actually, the reason I had my hand up is just to just give a shout out that this podcast received the 2020 CPEN Excellence in Cancer Education Award. And I'm not sure anyone mentioned that. I just wanted to point that out, that it's been really the standard for podcasts in our field, and just wanted to acknowledge that again.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff.
And very
Thank you,
kind of you,
Jeff.
Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks for that reminder. Yes, very great. I have a question. Has anyone been interviewed for a podcast or have been on a podcast before as a guest? Oh, here we go. Christina, I see your hand raised. Can you chat about that a little bit?
Yeah, I last spring recorded actually 3 or 4 webinars, or no, sorry, podcasts. Sorry, my head was in webinars, looking at you all on the screen. With a survivor who does them as a volunteer for the cancer support community of Philadelphia. So actually myself and another member of our OncoLink team were able to do that. And my whole series focused on navigating insurance and financial issues for cancer patients. And it was really interesting and fun. And my biggest complaint was there was such a lag time from when I recorded it to when it actually got edited and posted. And I think that's something, as we're thinking about going into this space, that we're thinking about bandwidth and just what that looks like and how timely, what we're saying on the podcast is to when we actually get it out there on the web for consumption. So I think for the last one, there was maybe a 5-month,
Oh,
wait
wow.
between when, yeah. And I mean, he's a volunteer. I get it. I understand he's probably, but thinking about that sort of logistically for us and how we incorporate that and make sure that it's timely, and that, I mean, I literally had forgotten what I said. And
Sure.
so and then I'm getting questions. I'm like, I'm not sure what I said when I recorded that.
You go
But I
back
think
and
that's a
listen to it
good
again.
point. Yeah, yeah. But I really, we actually had an SEO workshop yesterday with our team, and I think it's just so learning about the tech stuff, the text, TEXT, is so critically important. And I think that's one thing that's missing from a lot of podcasts that I see. So thanks
Yeah,
for that pro
sometimes
tip.
thanks for seeing it. Sometimes those show notes are just very brief and they don't have much in it. And really, because it's one more thing you've got to do, one more thing you've got to tackle. But really, there's a lot of value in it. And I have clients. I work in not just the nonprofit sector, but in some business clients as well that do weekly podcasts. So they'll record their own podcast. They'll Dropbox me the audio, and I'll have it turned around and ready to go within a week. So that delay can certainly be frustrating. I understand that.
That's great. Yeah, I was interviewed by, I also sit on the Oncology Nursing Society as part of their group, and I was on a podcast about patient ed, and they interviewed me, and it was super intimidating. I personally don't like my voice.
Nobody does.
My voice, right? No one. But I found out when I was talking to the person that was recording, and they're like, no one likes their voice. No one likes to hear themselves. So I kind of got over it. But it was really funny how when you're recording, you can stop and say, oh, I didn't want to, let me rephrase that. Let me say something a little clearer. And all these ums and little nuances we say, when I heard the podcast afterwards, that was all gone. So I was like, wow, it was really cool. It was a great experience. So if you get approached, I would definitely say if someone gets approached, they want to interview you for a podcast or would like your input, I would say do it wholeheartedly, because no one had your experience.
Yeah.
And what you say is very powerful. It can really help other folks.
It's funny
Well,
though. Physio. Go ahead, Peg. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
No, I'll come back. Go ahead, Peg.
I was going to say, if anyone on this program today would want to take a swing at it, if we could come up with a way to tie your expertise into what my constituents are going through, I'd be happy to give you the chance to try it out. So we'd have to make sure there's a fit, of course, but we have so much freedom in what we provide for patients and caregivers. And actually, I absolutely loved what you said, Bo. I really hadn't thought about that much, about how, for clinicians to get to hear the patients, that is fantastic. There's really, I'm always so focused on the other side of it, what the patients are going to get out of it. So that's the other side of the coin. Thank you.
I was just going to add to Bo's comment about not liking the sound of his own voice. Because of the physiology of it, you hear your own voice conducting off the bones inside your inner ear and do everything in your own head. So you don't realize what you sound like coming out of your mouth until you hear it on tape, so to speak. And so that happened. I don't think I've had a single person that's told me, "Oh, that's what I sound like. I didn't think my voice sounded like that."
Yeah, that's great.
Well, and the more you do them, the less scripted you sound. You know, I will listen to a brand new podcaster, and I was just telling John the other day, I could so tell this guy was just reading his script. And I know I did that in the beginning because I didn't know what else to do. So, you know, the longer you do it, the easier it gets too.
And there's no real blueprint to this. Some folks will have a script in front of them and it won't sound like they're reading. Some folks are more comfortable having a detailed list of bullet points in front of them as they're doing an interview. Some folks are more comfortable with the script. And really, there's no one way to do this. There's it's really finding, you know, trial and error and figuring out what works best for you.
That makes me think of we talk about this on my team a lot. Like if you review something that you wrote like 3 or 4 years ago, and you haven't reviewed it in a long time, and then you read it and you go, why did I write that? Why was that? I wrote, that was so bad. Like, I can't believe how bad that was. And then, cause you know, you grow when you learn things, you learn tips or things that's become shorter and, you know, more succinct. So really, really great. Does anyone have any final thoughts, questions, anything they would like to add? All right. Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate everyone being here. This was really a great discussion topic. Hopefully really got people thinking about what we could do. I do think, especially if you work at a larger organization, maybe you want to connect with your organization to see if they could have then maybe they already have a podcast going on, right? And maybe that's the opportunity for you to get in this space and talk with those people. And I would, you know, you want to clear it through your media people and like your social team, like all these things to make sure. I wouldn't start my own rogue podcast and say, I work at Memorial Sloan and say, oh, this is Memorial Sloan's podcast. Without so I know everyone will get their stuff vetted, but hopefully this, you know, brought up some inquiry that you can have and maybe some thoughts that we could serve our patients in a different way.
Thank you for the opportunity. This was fantastic. I'm really happy to share with such a great organization. And again, if you have any questions, Peg and I are always happy to answer them and have a chat.
Great. We'll get there'll be a survey that will go out at some point tomorrow. Please answer that so we can improve our webinars. Our next webinar is going to be in February. I believe it's going to be towards the end of February. We're still waiting to get a date down. And it's actually going to be with Overdrive, which is a library, like a virtual library that you can maybe offer your patients at your institution or how they can get that. All right, everyone, have a great rest of the week. Peggy and John, thank you so much for being here. It was really insightful and really appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you.
You too.